Hey everybody, and welcome to week 2 of class. Again, my name is Professor Scott Keys. This week, well, before we get into what we're doing this week, let me just remind you that every week I provide a video like this where I will sort of go over the material that we're going to be covering for the week. I might provide just 30 seconds to 60 seconds of an overview of some of the more highlighted or the content that I want to highlight for the week. And then any other pertinent information. So be sure that you're always looking at these videos. Some weeks will have more material than others, just depending upon the material and what's going on in the course. So one thing I do want to stress, since this is the second week and it's still probably a bit fresh, with respects to discussion boards, typically speaking from here on forth, unless otherwise stated, your main posts to all discussion boards will be due by Thursday at 11:59 p.m. And then you will have until Sunday to respond to at least one other student, as well as any comments that I leave for you. Now, one of the things you probably noticed last week is that, well, actually, you probably wouldn't have noticed this, but one of the things that's going to happen is that I will put in a score for the material that you upload on Thursday. So generally speaking, you upload Thursday your main answer to the question. Make sure that you are following the directions for these discussion boards. They can be found on the homepage in Canvas. And then what I will do is on Friday is I'll generally read through your discussion boards and I'll leave behind comments. But I will also put in a preliminary grade. Now, the grade that you will see on Friday and Saturday is not your final grade. It's not even necessarily the final score for the first post. Okay, the way that I grade these is you'll get up to 15 points for your first post and up to 15 points for your subsequent post to another student. So oftentimes what you'll see is I'll throw a score up on Friday of, say, something like 12 or 13 out of 30. Well, what that really means is that you got 12 points out of 15 or 13 points out of 15 or whatever it is for that first main post. Normally, what I will do is I will leave behind comments or questions or suggestions, and if you respond to those, then I will increase that score as it should be given an additional score. And then on Sunday, you will respond to another student, and you will get an additional up to 15 points. And then by Monday morning, when I grade all that, you will see your final score out of 30. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. But if you see a score that's somewhat low on Friday or Saturday, or if you happen to post early, I might grade it early. At any point, if you see a score that's below 15 out of 30, unless you missed something, it generally means that I've only graded half the points or half the grade, and you still have an opportunity to make more points. So just don't freak out about that, okay? It just helps me keep track of what it is I have to do. Okay, so this week we are going to be focusing in on the period of colonization. And one of the things that we need to be very aware of is that there are different forms and types of colonization that take place or did take place. And the form of colonization that occurred in what would become the United States is something that we call settler colonialism, okay? And the point of settler colonialism is people come over to settle. There is no return narrative that is expected. In other words, there's not a return ship that's waiting for you. Your objective is to settle the land. And in many instances throughout history, both the United States and others, and this would include things like French Algeria and others, settler colonialism is basically the idea that we are going to settle upon land that in many ways those who are settling upon it already view the land as being theirs, okay? The fact that indigenae live upon the land is merely a problem for settler colonialisms, and these indigenae need to be removed or transferred, as some theorists talk about. They need to be removed from the landscape in some way, and oftentimes that turned into violent removal. And many historians and anthropologists, among others, would argue that much of what happened to indigenae or Native Americans or Indians in what became the United States was an act of genocide. And in fact, we're talking about millions and millions of people who were wiped out by European diseases and by removal, oftentimes by force, to the point in which by the time 1900 rolls around, you've got just thousands of indigenae remaining, okay? So one of the things that we're going to be looking at as we talk about American history throughout the rest of this semester is thinking about settler colonialism and America within that context. That the land from the East Coast where we started all the way to the West Coast, sea to shining sea as it were, was an act of settler colonialism. It was a process. It wasn't a historical event. It was something that took a long time to unravel, and in many ways it's still very much a part of the American narrative, okay? So just understand that that's the context that we're going to be looking at this week, and we're going to be focusing in on Jamestown, which was settled in 1607 and onward. We'll be looking at some of the New England colonies, specifically Plymouth Plantation, 1620, and Massachusetts Bay, 1630. Eventually, those two colonies submerge into one, becoming Massachusetts. But there were originally 13 colonies. But for the sake of time, I don't have time to cover each and every one of these. So we'll be looking at their colonial experiences as well as some specific events that took place during those times, including the Salem witch trials, okay? And so just be looking at what it is that we have this week. We've got a lecture for you to look at. We've got some readings for you to look at. I even have a primary source that I want you to read, and it's written in the original handwriting, and it's very difficult to read. But I want you to give it a shot. Try and see what you can come up with. And if you have just can't figure it out, which I understand it's difficult to read, but if you absolutely cannot figure it out, contact me. I do have a different primary source that you can look at that is a transcribed version, okay? Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, a primary source is different from a secondary source. A primary source is something like a diary or a newspaper or a government document, something that was created at the time that you're looking at. So if we were to talk about a letter that was written in 1776, right, that would be considered a primary source. A secondary source would be like a historian's interpretation of primary sources, where they write something like your textbook. That would be considered a secondary source. Okay. All right, guys, I've rambled on here plenty. If you have questions, concerns, or just need some help, contact me and I will get back to you just as soon as I can. Otherwise, as I always will leave you, go in peace, be warm and filled, may the force be with you, live long and prosper, and may the odds forever be in your favor. Have a blessed week, guys.